Lagerstead, Archives and Special Collections Coordinator here at Thomas Green Public Library, and we're so excited to welcome back our guest, Graeme Marsden, for this evening's program. Previously, he has helped us decipher historical handwriting from the 1500s to the present, and now he lends his extensive knowledge to the celebratory America 250 program. You might also recognize him from his front page feature in the Patriot Ledger.
Yeah.
Yay, round of applause. Representing a typical soldier of the period with clothing, accoutrements, arms, and tactics, he will show us how a soldier lived during the Revolutionary War. We have lots of 250th anniversary events coming up in the next 2 months, online and in person, and encourage you to keep an eye out on our calendar and sign up for our newsletter to be notified of what's next. Thanks, of course, to the Friends of the Thomas Green Public Library for supporting programs like this evening's event, and thank you again for being here. And please join me in welcoming our guest, Graeme Marsden.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our staff from the library who really scored a home run with the publicity, getting a picture of me on the front page of the Patriot Ledger for those who look at newspapers nowadays. But it's also over the internet as well, so they did a wonderful job. And they do a wonderful job in supporting academic programs like this. So I'm happy to be a part of that. Now, interestingly enough, we have two reenactors here as well. Over here, we have a young guy who plays a Redcoat, and just walked in another guy who plays a Redcoat of the same regiment that I'm from. And he could give this lecture. If I dropped dead now, he could just step in like that. So that's great. So I reenact different periods, and I also do different characters. So I've got a gig coming up where I'll be doing Ben Franklin. I'll be letting my hair down, and trimming it to shoulder length for that. But I've done him several times. I don't pad myself up. It's just a question of how you stand, you see. The padding looks pretty false, so I don't do that. Well, let's look at the life of a Redcoat. And by the way, I play with the Hingham Militia sometimes, so it's the other side. And nobody seems to know what I'm going to turn up as, which side. And when you're doing a battle, a fake battle, no bullets, you know everybody else on the other side, and you say, hi, I'm going to shoot you later, see ya, that kind of thing. So let's start out with the clothing. And if you have questions, let's leave them to the end, and by all means ask them, and we'll be doing a lot of show and tell. All right, so I'm wearing a vest or waistcoat here, standard issue, a lot of buttons. I've actually got more than 50 buttons on my whole outfit, including the gaiters here. So it can take a while to get yourself together here. Underneath is a shirt. This is, I thought I'd not take the one off my back. I'd show you this one, and I'll pass it round. It's a fairly coarse cotton, but very comfortable. It has somewhat puffed sleeves, as you can see here. A gentleman would be wearing a similar garment, only in a finer cotton or silk, no less. The cotton would be fine, called lawn, L-A-W-N. But I'll pass this round. It comes down quite low, and that's because you don't wear any underwear under this. For a lady, she's wearing a very similar garment called a shift, only it comes down so far because the skirts are long. But it's essentially the universal clothing that people wore in that time. Now, the breeches here, spelt B-R-E-E-C-H-E-S. you can put a T in it if you like. The breeches, again, are of some durable material, and they end about here, just under the knee, with buttons. They have quite a large breech, as a matter of fact. This is called your breech. Remember, a breech birth means the baby comes breech first, right? A breeches buoy, you're accommodated only up to here as you're carried from ship to ship. And with a weapon, you have the muzzle end and the breech end. So a gun can be breech loading or muzzle loading. So these are the breeches. It's fall front. The front comes down. There's 3 buttons across here. It's fall front. All the similar garments at this period were like that, gentlemen or no. Strangely enough, in the previous century, the Pilgrim era, they used fly front. So it's a question of fashion. There's a lot of fashion involved in all of this because over the years, the uniform changes as well. So, yes. This item is merely to keep you looking kind of smart. It goes around your neck and then pass around a couple of these. This one is simply a piece of leather tied at the back. You've heard of the Marines, modern Marines, being called leathernecks. Well, this is why they're called leathernecks. Except it could often be horsehair, which is this one. I prefer this one because I've got a short neck and it doesn't deform as badly as the horsehair. And the horsehair, if it gets worn, the fibers can break and they can stick in you and they're very prickly. So here's a couple of different stock. They're called a stock. If you would pass it round.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Oh, hello. Glad you could come. And the coat. It's wool. It's red. Not all British regiments wore red, but most of them did. All right, here's the coat.
That's where they get the name.
Hello there. Good to see you, Anne. Oops. Having trouble with this one. Having a trouble with the lining here. The lining seems to be giving me a bit of trouble. Now the red coat will tell you what regiment we're representing. The army, the British Army, is divided into regiments, each one under the command of a colonel, and they're all very distinctive. The officers wear similar coats, but better wool and better dye even. So you can see an officer is wearing a more scarlet coat than this one. The dye for this coat is from madder. Madder's a plant, a root plant, and the dye that you get from it is very cheap. Probably the army picked red because it's the cheapest dye. Wool, it would naturally be wool. Britain was the world's largest provider of woven wool at the time and made a fortune doing that. So plenty of wool. Britain exported wool to its enemies as well as everyone else. Now, the facings here are distinctive. They tell you what regiment. You can also, if you know, you can see what rank I am as well. This regiment is 1st Foot Guards. That is to say, they still exist to this day. They're called the Grenadier Guards. You may have heard of them, perhaps. And the 1st Foot Guards, there were 3 guards regiments. When they sent regiments abroad, they never sent the whole of the regiment. And that was the case when the Guards came to England. It was the case in World War II as well. Not all of them go because they're palace guards. After that, the regiments are numbered. So we're 1st Foot Guards. There is a 2nd Foot Guards and a 3rd Foot Guards. They're all Royal Guards. And then you have regiments numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, up to the 80s or even low 120 or something at the maximum. So we never have a recruiting problem in the Guards, largely because it's an elite force. And whereas a regular regimental soldier would be paid 8 pence a week, if you're in the Guards, you get 1 shilling a week. That is 12 pence. So they never have a recruiting problem because they recruit from all the other regiments, you see. So that's the regiment, the 1st Foot Guards. Let me tie it up. It's fashionable. Notice how it splays out like this. That's the fashion. It's not meant to button tight, although it can if you undo all these. But it's meant to be worn just like that. You can tell the period that this is Revolutionary War era. If I'd been in the F&I, the French and Indian War, the uniform would be different. The turnbacks here would have been much longer. The vest, waistcoat would have come down further, and other items. Now, you have these 2 flaps on here, and they are to accommodate, let's see. They're to accommodate the haversack and other things. This is a soldier's private items in here, semi-private. So his knife, fork, and spoon, and anything else. His pack of cards, if you'd like to pass that round, he'd be having some of those items, and you can ask what they are afterwards. But he would wear his ammunition box, cartridge box, right? Again, it's got the crest on here, the badge of the 1st Foot Guards, and it's brass, and what it does is helps to keep the flap down, although it buckles underneath. Now, what's in here? Normally, there would be cartridges. I didn't bring any gunpowder tonight. I don't think Thomas Crane would have approved here. But you can see that there are holes here. The cartridge is a tube of paper filled with gunpowder and the bullet at the bottom. The advantage of this is it's quick firing, relatively so anyway. The other side, the Patriots, didn't early on have this item. They had powder horns. So you usually need 2 powder horns, one for a priming charge, put it down, put the stopper in, get the other one in, put the main charge in, put it away, and you're ready to fire. This one, you take a cartridge out, you bite the end off, I'll show you when I show you the musket anyway. But it's leather. It's got 2 layers, you know, about keep your powder dry, right? And this is a roll box, so it's got rows of cartridges on here, but also it's got the same thing underneath. So you can accommodate more cartridges on this. If you're a grenadier in the army, in the regiment, you have an even larger box here. All right, so I put that on here. And this is the bayonet carriage. It's called a carriage, it means it holds it. This is the bayonet here. It's not particularly sharp because it's a stabbing weapon. It's not really a cutting weapon, it's a stabbing weapon. And it is pretty fearsome. I'll show you when I've got the musket on there. So here it is. And I've got my water bottle, essential here. And then you fasten them down so that you don't lose them as you are marching through the countryside. And that's the origin of these flaps. They are practical. They also will accommodate an epaulette if you are high enough in office to do that. I'll pass around the shoe as well. This is a typical shoe here, and there's a pair of buckles for 2 shoes here if you want to see it. That's what the shoe looks like. And the hat. Now this is a pretty fancy parade hat for the regiment. The one they normally use is cut down considerably with black feathers in. The feathers help you look sharp, you know, and soldier always wants to look good. And this is, we nowadays call this a tricorn, 3 horns, right? It wasn't called that. It was called a cocked hat. It's a hat that's cocked up on 3 sides. The bordering here is a military affectation. It's not generally used by civilians, unless they're trying to look like a soldier, but here it is. Now all these bits and pieces, clothing and everything, would be imported from Britain. Even on campaign, the supplies as well, the food and everything else, were generally brought by boat from Britain. Now when the British Army was on campaign in the Carolinas, deep in the backwoods there, supplies became much more of a problem. And the regiment has a quartermaster who will pay for supplies, buying fresh fruit and vegetables for the regiment. One of the advantages for a soldier is he was guaranteed 3 square meals a day. Now, that was not what a lot of civilians got. But in the Army, you were guaranteed 3 square meals a day. And you had to have something to drink. It could be beer, it could be wine even. It was sometimes birch beer, which the Brits didn't care for because it's local here and they'd never had it before. So they'd much prefer wine or beer, and that's what they would get if they could obtain it. The regiment. The army, British Army, was divided into regiments, as I said, of nominally 600 men. Now, this is an infantry regiment, means we're on foot. There were also cavalry regiments. There were artillery, and there were dragoons as well, and a smattering of engineers and other people. Each regiment could have one surgeon and 2 assistants, and they had a chaplain. The surgeon and the chaplain were treated like officers. They were not officers, they had no rank, but they were treated like officers, so they messed with all the other officers. An officer on duty, if you've seen that brass or gold piece at the throat, officers would be wearing that when on duty, so it was a sign of being on duty for officers. So that was the regiment. It was divided up into 3 specialist types of soldiers. So if you were to join a regiment, they'd put you in the main body of men, the battalion. This is battalion, right? Now, if you were fleet of foot and maybe a little sharper, they might put you in the light infantry. And they had a different coat, looks somewhat like this, but it's shorter, and the hat is different, much smaller. So these light infantry were taught different tactics. They were taught the regular battalion soldiers, but the light infantry had extra duties. Now let's say we're doing a conventional battle with 2 rows, enemy and the Redcoats, facing each other. If you possibly could, the light infantry might well sneak into the woods, run around, and attack your enemy from the rear, if they could. They did different tactics to do that. The other division was the grenadiers. Now these were bigger, more formidable guys, tough guys, but probably a little smarter than the regular battalion. So if the 2 armies are facing each other, if there's a weakness, they'd probably be thrown at that to try and overcome the rest of them. The objective in these pitched battles was generally to push the other side off the field. That was the tactics. That's what George Washington tried to do all the time, but his other smarter generals like Greene and Knox were a bit sharper than that, and Greene, particularly in the Carolinas, would attack suddenly and then retreat. So Greene really never won a battle, but he succeeded in the attrition of the Redcoat army as well. So he was eminently successful, but he didn't win pitched battles like that too many times. So, this is the bullet, and I'll pass it round. It's a lead ball. It's just a ball of lead. I'll pass it around. And it comes in the cartridge. So the cartridges are pre-made, ready to be fired. And this is the weapon. Here. This is a musket. It's not a rifle. So when you hear on the news that the Minutemen are using their rifles on the Redcoats, it is not a rifle. Why not? It's a smoothbore. If you put your finger in there, you would feel that this is simply a tube. With a rifle, it has striations running down it. So that when you fire it, the bullet gets a spin on it, and instead of flying off at an angle as this bullet might well do, I mean, just less than a degree off, and you may not be able to hit your target. As I say, with a rifle, you put a spin on it, and it goes in the resultant direction, far more accurate. But the problem with it is, we're using gunpowder. We call it black powder. And it's pretty dirty and smoky. If you see a reenactment and you see all the soldiers in a row blazing away, there's a big cloud of smoke, right? And also, you have to clean it every now and again because it fouls the whole works in here. So, that's the rifle. There were some rifles, you've heard of the Kentucky rifle, lots of them were made in Pennsylvania, but they still call them that. The big disadvantage of a rifle, though, is, well, I can get off 3 shots a minute, maybe 4. They can get 1 off every 3 minutes. So they're very vulnerable, you see. So the rifle, and because it has the striations inside the barrel, it holds the bits of gunpowder in there longer and gets fouled up very fast. Also, you're issued with a little wooden hammer, and you may have to hammer the ball down there. On this weapon, we have a rammer that is used to ram down your cartridge. Now, when you're being inspected, the sergeant wants to hear that noise because he knows there's no gunk in the bottom here, right? I'll show you how you load it. It's a flintlock mechanism. There is a flint with some of the stuff going round. It's a sharp stone, very sharp. It can cut you, and it often does. I've not got one in here. But basically, at the command, well, it has the 3 positions, right? It has discharged, half cock. You've heard of going off at half cock. That is not what you want. And to check it, you would do this. So the trigger is not going to go off at half cock. Why not? Well, if you've got gunpowder in there and you're waiting to fire it like this, you don't want the gun to go off at half cock. So it's a bad thing. You also don't want to flash in the pan, which here is the pan. Flash in the pan, you need a flash, but it doesn't blow through into the main charge. That's a flash in the pan. Okay, so here's full cock, half cock, and ready to fire, which is this, right? Now, I don't have a flint in here. You would see a spark. Now, to load, we wait for the command. Commands come in 2 parts. The part where the sergeant is telling you what you're going to be doing, and the second part of the phrase tells you, do it, right? So if you go to Lexington Green and you see the Redcoats line up, you'll hear the command, you'll hear it repeated by the sergeants down the line. So, I'll show you the bayonet first as well. Let's see. This is the bayonet. So the order is to charge bayonets. The order is charge your... All the soldiers know what's coming next. Bayonet. Fix. Charge your bayonet. Huzzah! Now, you've got to imagine there's 50 soldiers this side and another 50 soldiers that side. And you might think, having seen John Wayne movies, that we rush across the field, banzai. Nope. That's because we're not facing machine guns. No, the command is just the opposite. It's not march, it's slow march, right? So, charge your bayonet. Huzzah! And then the drums start beating. They're beating the slow march. Brum, bum, bum, bum. Brum, bum, bum, bum. And here we go. Slow march. And what happens is, there's 100 bayonets, shoulder to shoulder, coming at you. And it gives you time to think that maybe you should think about running away. Because having been on the wrong end of a bayonet charge, even though I know they're not going to stab me, it's scary. It's scarier than just the gun. So often people did run away. And we're trained so that when you get close to the enemy, it's stab, they drop, and you're into the man behind them, right? And that's why it's triangular. Here, it's triangular to give it strength. This is 18th century steel. Well, this one isn't, but the real ones were. They were not quite as good. Steel was still in its formative years and less reliable. Steel had been around a long time. Think of Toledo in Spain, Wusthof in Germany, Solingen, places like that. There were skilled steelmen, but it was difficult to make until about 1840 when Henry Bessemer in England invented an appropriate furnace that could make steel rapidly and cheaply. So it's the bayonet like that. It's got a slightly concave arrangement running here. That's just to give it more strength. You'll see also on swords, which I would not be carrying, although the sergeant would be carrying. It has concave running down. You'll hear it said that, oh yeah, that's so the blood can run out. It is not. It is to lighten the sword. The concave parts are called fullers. So that's the bayonet. Part of the, you heard me talk about the drums, part of the regiment is music, very important. We have fifes and drums. And it's great as you're marching along a couple of miles or so to hear the music as you go along. It's lovely to hear it. It's cheerful. But it's used for commands, you see. In a battle, when there's all the noise going off, cannon are going off, there's so much firing going on, the commands are given by the drums. So there are lots of different commands. They also will control your day. You've heard of reveille, right? And you've heard of taps. Well, there's no taps in the British Army. It's called last post. So as a soldier, the first music you hear is reveille. Actually, there's a music call before that to get the music guys together. So if you're half awake, you'd better start doing up all your 50 buttons then, right? You don't want to be tardy with that. There's also other things called pay call. You need to know pay call. There's dinner call. You may know that one. Da, 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 da. That's the one that all the soldiers want to hear, the pay call. There's punishment call, but there's also advance, stop, and all the commands of the army as well. So that's what the drummers and fifers do. All right, where were we? We were firing this. There are two paces, essentially, in the army. There is the slow march, and that is, you will see soldiers doing that at a funeral. It's not the easiest of things to do, and if you're going slightly downhill, it's even worse. And the other is the march, and there's a quick march, and then there's march, which means get the hell over there as fast as you can. So that's the musket. I didn't show you the loading, right? Okay, so the command is prime and load. I get then open the pan. I get one of my cartridges out here. I'm waiting for the command. Tear it open. Put a priming charge in here. Cast about. Dump the gunpowder down with the ball on top of it. Now the ball is not accurate to the millimeter. So it's going down here somewhere. We hope it's going to the bottom, but it's not always a good fit. It's either just a tad too big or it drops down straight away because it doesn't fit. And that's why you need to ram down cartridge here. Now, it'll go ping. It better go ping anyway. Replace your rammers. And then go back to the shoulder and wait for the command. So you're used to the commands. You do a lot of drilling as a soldier to make sure you can fight adequately. And there are different ways you can fight. So you can be lined up. You can have a rank behind you. You can have several ranks behind you. So you can be like this. Oh, by the way, when reenactors are facing the enemy, you always elevate. You're not loaded, you just have gunpowder. But if a little stone got in there, not a good idea because it could be lethal. So if you notice, we're always elevating. And probably the sergeant's behind you saying, elevate, elevate, right? Like that. But in reality, you would be firing like this. And there's no take aim because this is not really that accurate according to modern standards. yes, there is a, shall we say, a sight on the end here, but it's not a sight, it's for fixing the bayonet. The early bayonets were just blades with a cork or wood on the end, and they were shoved in the end. The problem with that is you had to take it off to fire. Not only that, they would either fall out or you'd never be able to remove them. So they invented this offset bayonet here, and this fitting is called a bayonet fitting, no less. And you will find a lot of light bulbs in Europe have a bayonet fitting rather than an Edison screw. This is the bayonet here. It fits pretty securely. So imagining you've got it stuck in one of the enemy, it will not come off the end of there very easily. It will, if you were left with your bayonet stuck in somebody, a victim, you'd be the next victim. So you need it out, you need the bayonet on the end. And this is it with the bayonet fitting here. So the soldiers were shipped to America, but for Britain this was a world war going on. At the end of the Revolutionary War, France had declared war along with America. Remember, Ben Franklin and other ambassadors were in Paris trying to get the French to join in. And they did, to help America, but mainly to whack England, their traditional enemy. Unfortunately, they poured so much money into it, and indeed at Yorktown triumphed. It was really a French victory, but certainly Washington duly took kudos for it. But they did it so that they would be preeminent in the world and with the colonies rather than the British. A little later in the war, Spain joined. A little later in the war, the Netherlands joined as well. So there were three, the largest navies in the world at the time were the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. So they were all fighting here. But it was a world war because it was going on in India, across the Mediterranean, Germany, but the main theater for Britain and France was the Caribbean islands. If you think about it, they were growing sugar. Now, the sugar trade had been established and made Boston merchants wealthy indeed. Because the trade was for the sugar cane, the processed sugar, to be put on ships that came mainly to Boston, and then ships' supplies. Well, there's hardtack going around. If you haven't seen hardtack, it's the food not of choice there. It's very hard to eat, but if you have nothing else to eat, that's what you use. So,
excuse me.
Yeah.
Is this the Paul Revere?
That's a Porringer. It's not a Paul Revere one, no, I'm afraid.
The sign is beautiful.
Yeah, if it were signed, yes. I wouldn't be passing it round then, yeah. The trade, of course, the main industries in Boston at that time were cod fishing and boat building and rum. Boston rum, specifically Medford rum, was world famous, was shipped out to Europe and many other places. So That's what Boston grew rich on, the codfish and shipbuilding, rope, tar, timber as well. Now, sugar was an expensive commodity, and as I say, the merchants of Boston made a lot of money out of it. But if you took an island like Jamaica, every square inch was used for growing sugarcane. The gross domestic product of Jamaica was greater than the 13 colonies combined. So those Caribbean islands were very important to the trade of the French and the British as well. Now, after Yorktown, where most of the British Army had surrendered because they were surrounded by the French and the Americans, the war went on a little until the Treaty of Paris a little later. But the French fleet and the British fleet came into an engagement in the Caribbean islands, and the British almost annihilated them. So that was the main thing that was going on for the British, and of course throwing the French out of the whole of India at the same time, holding on to Gibraltar and all around the world as well. So it was quite a conflict. So America was a side issue, shall we say, important, but a side issue. And so the British never sent a large ship here to fight. They were all in the islands all the time. The 74s, that would be the most common huge ship. None of them ever came here at that time because they had other ships that could deal with the American, well, we didn't have a navy, of course, at that time. So, the officers now, I told you, you could recognize them once because they've got a golden-looking gorget, at least when they're on duty. And their buttons, instead of being pewter as mine are, now a lot of regiments have their regiment number on them. The Guards do not. They're just a plain button. The officers would be looking much more splendiferous. For the regular soldier, though, there was a system if you got injured. I said a regiment was about 600 men, but that would be at full strength with no invalids or for other reasons. But if you were injured, you were taken back to England, and you could opt to be an inpatient at Chelsea Royal Hospital, founded 1660, and there's a maritime hospital as well. Or you could get your pay, it was not full pay, sent to you wherever you lived. That was not the case for, I'm afraid, our American soldiers. So they were pretty well taken care of. That did not apply to officers. Officers had a commission. All right, let's say you're an 18-year-old. Your parents will buy you a commission as a youngster, as an ensign. It's the lowest rank of officer, right? It was kind of like buying an apprenticeship. Apprenticeships, your dad had to pay the merchant you were going to learn from, right? Like Ben Franklin, indeed. It was his father that bought the apprenticeship, albeit with his brother Richard. So the officer became an ensign. When there's a vacancy, he can move up, but he has to pay for the higher commission. The more he moves up, the more the commission costs, but it's like buying a starter home and then graduating to something a little better and going up. So when you retired, you sold your commission. It was as much as a mortgage. So it was worth a lot of money. The private soldiers didn't have that, but they had a system where they would be taken care of. I think I'll stop there and let's have some questions or corrections or whatever you got. Yes, sir.
As to the uniform, how about the cleaning and care of it? I had heard growing up that if they got the uniform dirty, rather than wash it, they used white clay pipe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
How did you keep your uniform clean? Well, you can imagine sleeping out in tents or out in the open and marching through mud and everything. You needed to keep your uniform clean. Yes, these are clay, pipe clayed, and a soldier in his off time would use the muddy, looks like white mud, to paint these to keep them white looking. He needed to keep his uniform clean. Whatever happened, you did get dirty, but you did get a replacement of at least part of your uniform every year. The uniforms came from Britain. They were not tailored to fit. You picked the one that the quartermaster said would fit you perfectly. And of course, you had camp followers who might well be doing the pipe cleaning, but they were doing the laundry as well for you, often enough. If it was not your wife, she'd probably charge you a penny or two to do the laundry. So the camp followers, and there were children among them, were part of the regiment. They were on staff, at least most of them were. So if the army left America, then the people that are on record, the camp followers, would go with them on the ships. So there were a lot of camp followers who did a lot of that work as well. Indeed, nursing as well, very important. Yes, sir?
How many uniforms would a person have? Because if you got to do laundry, well...
Yep, a practical man speaks here.
What?
You're a practical man, sir, yeah. Yes, you did have replacements in the baggage. So the baggage train that followed. Now, of course, something like Lexington and Concord, there's no baggage train because it's a quick police action. Didn't turn out to be quick, but they didn't have the full outfit with them. So yes, you would typically have 2 shirts, for example, and maybe a change of the coat. And woe betide, you lose a button when it's inspection time, because we have sergeants who are going to make sure you're made a disgrace of. You slovenly soldier! Yes, 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 sir.
How long were the enlistments for the ordinary soldiers, and what kind of demographic, if you will, were they drawn from? Were they essentially the poor? Were they criminals?
Right. What's the demographics of the soldiers? Well, they're a lot younger than I am, for starters. They are generally young men in their late teens or their 20s. Some of the sergeants would be older than that, for sure. And where did they come from? Well, for this elite regiment, we plundered them from other regiments. So other regiments would hold meetings in a town. So you'd pick a sergeant major or just a sergeant who looks big, important, well-fed, has a booming voice. His musket and accoutrements are sparkling, and he'll hold a meeting in the town square. Behold, citizens bold who have a chance to make fame and fortune for themselves. Come to the drum, and there you will receive the king's shilling, etc., etc. And he'd buy you a beer as well. and you would join. Often enough, you'd be drinking your pint pot, which is typically not glass. There's always opaque. They'd slip a shilling in there, and when you get to the bottom, you just signed up for the army. So they did have recruiting drives, at least for the other regiments, and they often were the poor. So if there'd been a drought or a poor harvest, the younger sons would be encouraged by the parents to go join the army. 3 square meals, clothing. It seemed pretty good deal. Who were they? A lot of peasants, yokels, yes, in the army. And also people who they thought they could make a career out of it. And indeed, some of them did rise through the ranks, at least the non-commissioned officers. Who were they? Well, a leading author suggests, well, he says that at the Battle of Bunker Hill, there were as many Irish in the British Army as there were in the other side. About equal numbers of Irish origin people. So yeah, quite a lot of Irish. And
Did they volunteer, the Irish, or were they
yes,
impressed?
yeah, both. And we had to ignore the fact that they were Catholics as well, because they were not supposed to be in the army, but many of them were. And you do have a chaplain, of course, in each regiment. You have a chaplain as well. So where did they come from? All walks of life, yeah. A lot of younger sons who, their dad is a blacksmith, and the oldest son will inherit it, but the younger son, go seek your fortune, boy. The sign-up period was at His Majesty's pleasure. So imagine if you were shipped out to India, you're not coming back soon. And you probably didn't want to go to the islands where a lot of people died of diseases. That was the worst place to go, but you had no choice. So,
I have a question.
yeah,
Very good, because most of us are educated through Hollywood films.
yeah.
There you have the real stuff, so that's really good. You're so well versed from this topic. What are the grenadiers? Because, for instance, 1976, Queen sent the Royal Grenadiers here to perform
Yep,
at the TV Garden, and I remember
I was there too, yeah.
went to see that. That was the gift.
The
for
band
us.
of the Grenadier Guards. Yes, it was the band.
We have seen them in England,
Yeah.
parading, and it's an awesome sight, and the precision. So, what are the grenadiers? What
The Grenadier Guards is a regiment.
oh, it's a regiment. Okay.
It's a household regiment,
Okay. That's
as
why
opposed
the
to
queens.
army.
So they belong to the queen.
Yeah, or the king, as we have now. Yes, they are guards. That's household regiments. So you've got those 3 regiments: first guards, second guards, third guards, and nowadays you've got 2 more. And you've got cavalry as well, and artillery.
I remember, and you demonstrated the step, and they also used that step as
Yes, the slow march.
slow step, and some, So I still remember it. It was so impressive.
It is impressive, and
Yes,
it's
I noticed
fairly
that.
hard to do.
When the prince got married, he used some kind of a special step when they were married. I especially looked at it. It's sort of it wasn't
Royalty
the royalty
is
step.
typically the colonel of those household regiments.
Yeah.
So they have to have basically a deputy colonel to run things, and the royalty are the honorary, if you like.
Yeah, and they used that special step when they came out of St. Paul's Cathedral.
Yeah, right.
Or was it, oh no, it was in another.
What makes it easier is, of course, the music, your music is playing,
Yes.
And the Grenadier Guards quick march is the Grenadiers, you know. Bum 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 bum. But they have a slow march as well called Scipio, which was written by Mr. Handel and presented to them. And Scipio's their slow march. Yeah.
Could you explain the dragoons, how they were?
Dragoons, yeah. Dragoons are often misunderstood because they're on horseback, but they're infantry. What they do is they're the flying squad. So if a general is in charge of the battle and he sees a weakness half a mile down the road, he can send the dragoons who dismount and fight as infantry. But they can be sent somewhere rapidly. So again, they have a different uniform and they're a regiment to themselves. So that's what a dragoon is. Not cavalry exactly, but they're the flying squad. Well, let me just check this gentleman.
I'm sure a great amount to solve this question, but loading that rifle is a pretty elaborate process.
Yeah.
Was there any thought to having it preloaded? Or would it gum up the works?
It's a musket, not a rifle, of course. Yeah. There were rifles, but as I said, the Kentucky type rifle, which is very long indeed, but vulnerable. And the British did invent a rifle that, amazingly enough, was not muzzle loaded, but it was breech loaded. So you opened the breech here, pushed in your cartridge and ball, closed it, and fired it. It was called the Ferguson rifle. It was invented by Major Ferguson, a British Army, and he demonstrated it to the mucky mucks in Britain at Woolwich, the arsenal. And he laid on his back in the rain and hit the target each time, and faster than a musket. And they said, "Great stuff. We'll call you." So there were some of them were made and used in the Revolutionary War. And in fact, Major Ferguson was killed in the South, the Battle of King's Mountain. Tremendous loss, but there you go. So yeah, it's, the question was, could we preload them? No, you need to clean them out. And of course, there's no magazine on one end of it because it has to be muzzle loaded, not breech loaded. Ferguson showed you could do it otherwise, but it was also too expensive. The beauty of this weapon against the weapons that were used, at least in the first part of the Revolutionary War, each man had to have his own musket, right? That was a requirement because in New England, they took the English system of having a militia. Every able-bodied man aged 16 to 60 had to be part of the militia. To be classed as a town, you had to have several things. You had to have a town government, it was, of course, selectmen. You had to have a place for them to meet, the meeting house, which doubled as a church, right? You had to have a militia, same rules, 16 to 60, and they had to have a place to exercise. That's why we have so many town greens. Oh, and the other thing was, to be a town and not a plantation, you had to have an inn, which is a place for drink and food and public accommodation, including for your animals. So that's to be a town. You had to maintain that. You lose one of those criteria, you're downgraded. You're no longer a town. So Yeah. So,
Cohasset Common is one of the big ones.
yeah, well, every town,
Fell there. Or in. You know,
Quincy had one.
Quincy had one.
Braintree, shall we say. It was Braintree, of course. And it was right next to the church there, the United First Parish Church now. But it's been developed since then. Sorry, you were gonna
Yeah, I was just going to ask, why did the mighty British Army lose the war?
Right.
I mean, I know there's lots of theories.
There's lots of theories, so it'd be hard to tell you any one reason. The French poured lots of money in and bankrupted themselves, so doing, and they had their own revolution because they were bankrupt. Theirs didn't work out as well as this one, and it's magnificent. As a Brit myself, I can be in admiration of the fact that the Americans pulled off becoming a republic. It's unbelievable. But then you had some great leaders like Washington, who was not the greatest general, but some of his other generals were, for sure. As I said, like Greene, who was a Quaker, by the way, but they had some good generals. And the fact that the Americans were fighting for their home ground, or on their home ground. So, you know.
It said that Washington knew that he didn't have to win the war, he just couldn't lose it.
Exactly right. That was it. And that was the tactics a lot of the times. I mean, the Battle of New York there was a debacle for Washington. But he got smart as a fox, if you think of Trenton, where he uses sneaky tactics of creeping up on the soldiers who are celebrating Weihnacht, the Germans, Christmas. But they were not always so sharp. This regiment took part in the Paoli massacre, quote and unquote. What they did was they unfairly attacked the American camp at night. It was led by the general who got to be called No Flints, Gray, because he sent them in with muskets with no flints in, but fixed bayonets, and they killed a lot of Americans. It was called a massacre afterwards, just as the Boston Massacre is a bad incident, not a massacre. A massacre is premeditated. It has to be a massacre. Yeah?
The massacre, what was the name, please?
Paoli in Pennsylvania. It wasn't huge, but if you go to Paoli, just outside Philadelphia, it's the big deal in town. And No Flints Gray sent them in at night, and of course the soldiers were feeling their way around, and if the Americans fired a shot, then he was the next target. They could see somebody firing and go get him in the dark. So the Americans didn't learn, so the regiment did it a couple of times after that. The Americans didn't learn from that. So you had some men in charge who were not very adaptable. And you had people who just refused Washington, like Lee. Washington is reputed to hit him with the side of his sword. He was so truculent. But there you are. He had all kinds of generals, some are very good ones. Yeah. Cool. Questions? Any more? Yes, sir.
The uniform changed drastically from, say, the American Revolution to the War of 1812 because simultaneously during that period, you had the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. Did the uniform change over years? Yes, you can actually go online, and if you look, you'll see an AI rendering of a soldier from 1760, boom, he turns into 1775, and so on and so forth. No, they were still wearing redcoats at the War of 1812, which was in retaliation for the Americans attacking Canada. But the hats changed distinctly to the shako type.
The other thing I want to ask is the ranks they wore. Say, you mentioned specifically England or Ireland.
Yep.
Would that have increased significantly in, let's say, 1800 when you had the Act of Union between Great Britain, Ireland, and Scotland?
Yep.
Obviously, you're going to be able to draw on more men because at the time of the Revolution,
Yeah.
Ireland and Scotland were not technically part of the UK. Is that true?
Well, Act of Union was Queen Anne's time, 1700 whatever. So it was before that.
I thought it was the turn of the century.
It was the turn of the century, but it was Queen Anne's time, yeah.
I thought it was 1800.
No.
After the Irish Revolution of 1798.
Yeah, the Wolf Tone Rebellion, yeah. A lot of people don't understand the terms about Britain, right? Great Britain is the clump of islands that compose Ireland, Scotland, Wales. England is separate. Nowadays, England and Wales are one unit. Scotland is different. Northern Ireland belongs to the United Kingdom, but it's not Great Britain. Great Britain is the whole geographical mass that's off France. So there's different terms that mean specific things. And did soldiers come from Ireland? Sure. Scotland as well. Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah. A lot of the British generals were Scottish. Fraser, I mentioned. Yeah, and others. Yeah. Other questions? All right. We have one reenactor friend here. I hope he doesn't know more than I do.
You mentioned earlier that on some uniforms, on most uniforms, the buttons have numbers on them.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why the guards don't have numbers?
Well, the guards don't. It's only the Grenadier Guards don't have numbers because we are number one. Truly, it is. What's that? Well, if the British Army lines up, nowadays even, the guys in the front are this regiment, right? So they are number one. Now, were they founded first? We fight that out with the Coldstream Guards. It's, well, what do you mean? You know, exactly. So, is it the oldest regiment? Maybe, maybe not. But the other regiments all have numbers on. If you're an officer, you've got gold or silver button as well. So, if you're a reenactor, that can be a heavy hit if you're going to play an officer. If you're not, these are the cheapest of the buttons of all. That's great. But making this pattern is difficult and costly. So you win some, you lose some, you know. What is your regiment, remind me?
64th.
64th, right. They're way down the pecking order. Now, before the Revolutionary War, the regiments used to be named after the colonel. So if the colonel retired, your regiment came a different name. Importantly, the regimental system as we know it started during the English Civil War. That is when they first wore uniform, right? Oh, novel idea. Instead of a rabble in arms, you know. And it was red, as I said, because that was the cheapest dye, right? The French wore white. As a matter of fact, when Rochambeau was marching from Newport all the way down to Yorktown, they stopped outside Philadelphia and washed all their clothes, brightened up all their webbing and everything, and then got the music, and they had horns in it. The French had horns, not just pipes and drums, and they marched into Philadelphia just to show off how wonderful they were. And it worked. That's the French, you know. All right. I'll be around a little if you want to poke around and ask other questions, by all means.